Hi guys, my name is Jonathan from Jovenel Auto Works, and today I'll be showing you how to do a valve adjustment on 2000 or 2009 Honda S2000s. The specific vehicle we will be working on today is the 2007 Honda S2000, and all the procedures in this video should apply to all Honda S2000s years 2000 to 2009. Before we begin the job, we have to make sure that the vehicle or the engine is fully cooled down, and I have this box fan on top of that engine for about 2 hours to make sure it was cooled down completely. The reason why we need it cooled down completely is because our valve adjustment or the clearances will be off if the engine is warmed up or in a hotter state. So we want the engine at ambient temperature. We will also be replacing the valve cover gasket, and unlike the valve cover gasket kits sold by Honda for the other vehicles, it does not come with the spark plug tube seals, but it does come with the valve cover sealing washers. So we also had to order 4 spark plug tube seals, and my customer opted to have the spark plugs replaced. We ordered these spark plugs directly from NGK, and these will be the identical spark plugs that would be included in a Honda box if you were to order spark plugs from Honda themselves. So without further ado, let's get started with the valve adjustment. Alright guys, let's get started. So we unclip this cable right here. And also unclip it back here. It's hard to see, but that way that cable can move. This can get in the way. And then I like to remove this bolt that holds that cable down. It just gives me a more leeway. I'm going to pull the valve cover off. But just be careful not to force it because this is connected to the heater valve. Next I'm going to go ahead and remove the connector for this cam position sensor. And we'll remove this ignition coil cover and the bolt for that. I like to remove this sensor just so it gives us more space and it prevents us from damaging the sensor. Those sensors can get expensive, so I'd rather remove it and play it safe. Now these cam shaft position sensors, the connectors can get very brittle because it's in a high heat area next to the exhaust manifold. So I recommend not unlatching it or unlatching the connector by clicking on this by using a screwdriver. It just helps prevent it from breaking. There might be a chance that it might still break, but I like to prevent it. Let me see where my flathead, small flathead is. Let's use this one. Or actually, I can even use a X-Acto knife. It's the tip of a knife blade. Right here. Just like that. clean off the sensor so so that okay, good reading. Sometimes some metal shards, some metal particles can contaminate the end of the sensor. I like to clean it off because the engine relies highly on the sensor for ignition timing and whatnot. All right. Let's remove the ignition coils. I'm gonna go ahead and mark these coils. It's just a habit I have. The coils are identical, but the car came in with no issues and we're doing this valve adjustment for maintenance. I tend to like to put things back where they came from. I'll just wipe the marks off when I'm done. It's a good habit. These ignition coil connectors are a little hard to remove with the ignition coil in, so I like to start taking it out so I have better access to it. Once again, these can get very brittle, so just be careful with the connector. And no connectors broke. That's a win. We'll pull this harness aside. There's actually a clip back here that I usually disconnect or that I unlatch so that the harness gets more slack. And then I usually also like to go ahead and disconnect the VTEC solenoid so that the harness will be free. It'll still be connected to the oil pressure switch in the bottom, but at least we have more slack now, so it won't get in the way. We can just put it down here, nice and out of the way, just like that. Move the oil dipstick. Run out of space on my box, I'll start putting stuff on the ground. Don't have a workbench set up in my home garage at the moment. One of my future projects. So the best bet to remove these hoses without damaging it is to use a pick tool. Smooth. Sometimes it's inevitable that you'll damage the hose, but just do it like that. Work your way around. And also for this one, there's a little technique I do where I slide this hose over here. So you can see, do that. I'll also break it loose on this side. Just like that. And then I can slide it. Just like that. You see how I slid it? It gives us more space, more slack when we install the valve cover. And then we'll just simply slide it back this way. We could even take out the tube. Let's just do that. This tube, go ahead and slide this back so it doesn't fall out. We'll just set it aside right here. Alright. There. Let's put it right here. This cover, remove it, just pulls out. And then for better access to do the intake valves to adjust it, I like to remove the injectors, or not the injectors, but unplug the injectors in the harness for the injectors. Just gives me more space. And let's go ahead and plug them. I have big hands, so if you have smaller hands, you might not need to do this step. Okay. Looks like the valve cover is ready to be removed. There are 5 valve cover bolts. Now I like to remove these valve cover sealing washers right now. I hate to remove the valve cover and one of these drops inside the cylinder head. These are going to the trash. New valve cover gasket kit comes with new ones. We'll now be able to remove the valve cover. This harness. Push it down. You see that right there? That's why I like to loosen it, so I have more space, so I don't damage the valve cover. Use a pick tool to remove the gasket. I'm going to be replacing that. And also for the spark plug tube seals, I use one of these. These are an adjustable pry bar. Let's do it like this. These are going to the trash. I like to clean gasket mating surface. Clean where the spark plug tube seals will sit, and I like to dry off oil. My microphone. I like to dry off the oil from the tops of these rocker arm adjustment or adjusters. The reason why I do that is I like to mark them for two reasons. A, so I don't lose track of what's been adjusted and what hasn't been adjusted. Sometimes it goes out of order. So if I, let's say, started with cylinder 1, sometimes the next cylinder is going to be 4 or 3. So just want to make sure that we don't go back to the one that we already adjusted. And I also mark them. I mark the top of these so that if a customer would ever try to use it against me saying that I didn't do a valve adjustment, if you open up the valve cover, all of them are marked. And that's how you know I was in there. It's going to be impossible, with the oil fill hole being here, it'll be impossible to mark these had the valve cover not been removed. And you'll be surprised how many shops, dealerships, etc. will say they did a valve adjustment and never even remove the valve cover. So, okay. Now I'll go ahead and set the cylinder number 1 to TDC. So we have to turn the crankshaft. First we have to make sure that the car is in neutral, because if it's in first gear or in reverse, then the engine will have a hard time spinning. I have the e-brake up, but I'll still put a set of chocks just for 100% sure. Some cars, their e-brake is not adjusted correctly. So when it's in neutral, it could roll back. You definitely don't want that. Alright, so we're in neutral, e-brake is up. So yeah, if you're ever trying to spin the crankshaft and you're having a hard time spinning it, verify that it's not in gear. All right. So this engine spins clockwise, like normal engines, but you can't always assume that because some vehicles spin counterclockwise, just like on B and D series engines off the Civics and Integras. So what I'll do is get my wrench, and a 19mm. So since the spark plugs are still in there is going to be some resistance because it's building compression. That's a good thing. I used to do valve adjustments with the spark plugs off so that it will spin free. But as I've been in the business longer, I'd rather have a hard time or spend more time trying to spin an engine with spark plugs on than having the spark plugs off and risking dropping a tool or a nut or a bolt inside the spark plug holes. So now whenever I do valve adjustments, I leave the spark plugs on. So this is the crankshaft pulley, and we're gonna put it into cylinder 1 TDC. Now, I used to have a technician that worked at my shop, and I told him there's 2 TDCs. Make sure you're on the right TDC, TDC compression. And he didn't know what I meant. So for anyone that doesn't know, engines have 2 top dead centers. It could be at the top of its stroke during compression, which is where we want to adjust the valves, or it can be at the top of a stroke during exhaust, which is where you don't want to adjust the valves. And just looking at cylinder 1, in my experience, I could already tell this is already basically at TDC compression because the valve lobes are facing away from the valves evenly. I would say another couple hits and it should be at TDC. And you can tell right there, I don't know if you guys can see that. That red mark is a timing mark. It's between 2 black indents. That's your BTDC mark. That's for ignition. And that white mark, let me spin it, on the bottom is your actual TDC. So you only want to spin the crankshaft in a way where the engine's meant to spin. So if this engine spins counterclockwise facing the engine, only spin it that way. Do not go backwards. If the timing system, let's say the chain is stretched or the guides are broken or the tensioner is faulty, if you spin it backwards, there is a possibility that this chain will skip teeth and your engine will go out of timing, and you can potentially damage your engine if you try to start it that way and the valves end up making contact with the pistons. So this is cylinder 1 TDC. I know that because these valve lobes are facing out. Now, and also not only that, on the camshaft, there's gonna be marks. There's gonna be a line right here, a line right there. And there's gonna be marks on this sprocket right there and right there, how it's in line with the cylinder head. That's how you know it's in cylinder 1 TDC. Now, if you didn't know if it was, then I would remove the spark plug. I would spin the engine while you have your hand on top of it and spin it clockwise until you feel your hand build pressure. I also have a tool for that we put on top of this while we spin it, and when it builds pressure, it'll whistle like this. And then once you determine that you're in the compression position, going up, then I would put you could use this one. You put the dipstick in there, and then you monitor the dipstick. Actually, this wouldn't be a good one. You wouldn't want to use that one. I do have a dipstick, a Honda dipstick that I use for this. This is off of a K-series. And you just watch the dipstick and then you catch it when it hits the height of its stroke. Do not use the Honda dipsticks that have an aluminum bottom piece on it. They're on the V6s. Do not use that. That aluminum is not magnetic and it also breaks. Tell me why I know. I used it one time. It broke. It got jammed between the piston and the cylinder head. It broke, and it was one hell of a time trying to retrieve the aluminum pieces. Yeah, it was not fun. So I don't recommend you use an aluminum dipstick or any tool that's not steel, and any tool that might be brittle and break inside of the cylinder. All right, so now that cylinder 1 TDC compression is established, we can go ahead and start adjusting the valves. So this is the intake valves. See how I can move it and it's making that noise? That's the lash or the clearance we're gonna adjust that clearance. We're gonna make that clearance bigger or smaller depending on where it's at compared to the manufacturer specification. See that? Generally speaking, if you think you're in TDC of whatever cylinder you're trying to adjust and these don't move, then you're probably not on TDC compression for that cylinder. Okay, so the valve requires different clearance between the intake and the exhaust. On this specific engine, Honda requires 0.21 to 0.25 millimeters on the intake and 0.25 to 0.29 millimeters on the exhaust. I'm gonna target the smaller or the smaller clearance because over time, generally speaking, the valves will loosen up over time, but I do know on some vehicles, sometimes the valve tightens up over time. If let's say the valve seats and the valves are made out of a material that is soft and then they will wear out over time, that valve will actually sit deeper inside of the cylinder head and it will make that valve clearance smaller. But generally speaking, usually the tips of the valve, the cam lobe, the rocker arm wears out and that causes the clearance to go up. So I've heard both happen. So we just want to make sure that we're within spec, and I like to do the smaller specification. That way the valve will open up further to allow more air and fuel, give you more power, better fuel economy. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and start with that. So I set up my feeler gauges. I already chose them. We have my intake, 21 millimeters. I usually like to mark it. My exhaust, 25 millimeters. So now, since I know I'll be adjusting all of the valves, I don't do that thing where you check to see if it's within spec and adjust only if needed. I just adjust all of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and loosen all 16 of those locking nuts on the rocker arm. And then I'm going to go ahead and have my torque wrench set up for those locking nuts. Specification is 14 foot-pounds. So I have my torque wrench set up for that. And then we're going to need a flathead screwdriver. So as you guys can see, I don't have any special tool for adjusting valves. Some people have a tool that has this screwdriver contraption with a handle that you do this. I don't do that. I'll show you guys a technique that I've been using for a very long time, and it doesn't require doing that, because sometimes doing that, holding the screwdriver and then holding this and doing that can cause change in motion or movement in the adjustment. So I'll show you guys how I do it. So this is not to get confused. We are not measuring clearance between the lobe and the roller. We are not. Don't get that confused. We are measuring clearance between the top of the valve and the rocker, which would be right here. This is where we're measuring clearance. So once again, we're not measuring clearance here or here, if you want to talk about the same valve. we are measuring clearance from the top of the valve here. So on the exhaust side, this is where we're measuring clearance. And on the intake side, this is where we're measuring clearance. Right there. All right. So to be able to use these, we have to bend our feeler gauges. So I like to get a flathead, or not flathead, needle nose. And just bend it like this. That'll allow us to do this right there. And then same for the exhaust. All right, let's get to adjusting. So since those lock nuts are loosened, we can now spin these with a flathead, okay? This is what we're turning to do the adjustment. You tighten it, it's gonna close the gap. See how I can't tighten it no more? That's because right now there's no clearance between the top of the valve and the bottom of this adjusting bolt. Now if we back it out, we open the clearance. Let me back it out a lot so you guys can see how much it can move. See how much that moves? And then let me put it in all the way where there's no clearance. See how there's no movement? This is what we're adjusting. All right, so start with the intake. What I like to do is I like to adjust the valve that is hardest to access first. So if you look, when I adjust this valve, how I'm so close to this right here, you see right there? I don't want to adjust this first. If I adjust this first and get this dialed in and then go here and accidentally spin it or touch it, that adjustment is going to be bad. So now I go ahead and adjust the one that's hardest to access first, which is this one right here. I'll spin it until it's tight. So see how that's nice and tight and it holds it? My test is to be able to pull this out and insert it back in right there. Now an example of something that's too tight, let me turn it just a little bit more. See how I can't put it in? That's my example of too tight. So let me back it out just a hair. Still doesn't want to go in. A little more. Boom. That's right on the money. We'll do the next one. This one's way out of whack since I was messing with it for demonstrative purposes. Perfect. I'll just double check this one. Go. I think I might have hit it when I was adjusting the other one. Perfect. So that's adjusted, but it hasn't been locked down yet. Now we'll go ahead and do the exhaust. Oh yeah, the exhausts were loose. Perfect. And then the other one, this one was a little tighter. So another tip is when you insert this, you want to make this as flat as possible. Meaning, if it was like this or like that, it would have a hard time going in and you might get that confused with the valve that is too tight. So as you can see, I put it in as level with the top of the valve as possible. See how it goes in? And then this one. Perfect. So now this is the part where I personally haven't seen anyone do it this way to lock the to tighten the lock nuts without spinning the adjustments, the adjuster bolt. So this is what I do. Now I'm gonna spin the crankshaft same way, clockwise, until this or these exhaust valves get compressed at their max. So you'll see it start moving. See how it's moving? I'm gonna keep spinning until they are at their max. Boom, it's at its max. And what happens is when it's being compressed, that bolt doesn't move anymore. See that? I mean, if you wanted to force it, yes, it will move, but tightening this nut will no longer change your adjustment. Now, you don't want to get it confused. Just because this side's compressed doesn't mean that side is. So once we tighten these locking nuts down, we have to spin it again to tighten the intake. So these are ready to tighten down. 14 foot-pounds. Boom. Cylinder 1 exhaust is complete. It's done now. Move on to the cylinder 1 intake. And yeah, I like to verify that it doesn't spin. I know it's not gonna spin because I've done these so many times, but you still have to verify that it's not gonna spin, because on some Hondas where they have an eco technology or something like that, some of the cam lobes don't actually compress the valves for some reason. I forgot what the technology is. So you have to make sure that the cam lobe is pushing on it and locking it down. On the ones that are not touching the valve lobe or the cam lobe, those are gonna spin free, and you have to do those the traditional way, where you would hold the center while you tighten the nut. So these are ready to tighten. Perfect. And I like to spray some brake cleaner on a rag. Clean off the tops of these. Just like that. This is the mark I was telling you guys about. This indicates that this cylinder is done. We don't have to touch it no more. It also indicates that I have been here. This is my signature. If somebody was to tell me or ask me, hey, did you adjust the valves on my car? They can literally take off the oil cap and look down and see if my mark is there. I've seen these marks last tens of thousands of miles. And they're still like a little faded, but you'll see a faint color from a mark that I've done years prior on engines. So that's just a little thing I do. Okay, so next I'm gonna move to the next closest cylinder that is gonna be at TDC compression. So what I usually do is I just pay attention to these cam lobes, and I see that this cam lobe is facing up and this one's facing out. This cylinder 2 is very close to getting on cylinder 2, or to getting on a combustion, TDC combustion. So I'll make it spin a little more. And yeah, it's almost at cylinder 2 combustion. And what I do is this. Get a flashlight. And I look for the marks. You see this mark? When this mark is over here, that means that cylinder 1 is in TDC. So I want to be exactly 90 degrees. So I keep spinning it until this is 90 degrees from the cylinder head. Not 90 degrees from the ground, but from the cylinder head. On S2000s, the cylinder head or the engine is tilted this way. So you can basically line this up with that arrow. So we'll do that. Boom. Cylinder 2 is in TDC combustion. The lobes are facing out and away. These have movement. So this one's ready to adjust. Let's do the intake first. Now you see why I removed these harnesses and that injector. That would have been in my way had I not removed those. Perfect. Too tight. Double check. Perfect, right on the money. Let me verify this one again. I don't know if I slapped it. Nope, I didn't. Okay, quick and easy. Perfect. That's all dialed in. Let's tighten the lock nuts. Spin the engine until the exhaust valves are being compressed. I already know that these, I did the screwdriver test on the cylinder 1, so I already know that these are locked in. If you want, you could check, but I know for a fact they're locked. We can tighten the lock nuts. Spin the crank. Until the intake valves are being compressed. Perfect. And we can tighten these as well. Perfect. On to the next. Looks like cylinder 4. I told you guys how it might go out of order. Cylinder 4 is next runner up. So cylinder 4, the pistons are on the same plane as cylinder 1. It's hard to explain, but cylinder 1 and 4, the pistons are at the same height at anywhere in the stroke, and cylinder 2 and 3, they're at the same height in anywhere of the stroke. So on cylinder 4, not only can we line up the lines with the cylinder head, we can also use the TDC mark at the crank. So if you look at the crank, it should be coming up to TDC. Right on the white mark, boom. We're at cylinder 4 TDC. Not cylinder 1 TDC, but cylinder 4. Cylinder 1 is at TDC, but it's in cylinder, not cylinder, it's in exhaust, the exhaust stroke. So we verify that the lobes are sticking out, and to just verify, remember that line that would usually be over here, it's not facing out and it's level with the cylinder. over the cylinder head. Let's go ahead and adjust that. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. So those are all adjusted. Spin it. All right, so the 4 is in, the exhaust valves are compressed. Tighten it. Let's compress the intake valves. Microphone. All right, guys, we are 3/4 of the way done. All we have left is cylinder 3. And as you can see by the lobes, we're very close. All right, let's watch the cam. So now this line right here, I want to wait for it until it gets at a 90 degree or perfectly up from the cylinder. And then I'll just line it up with this number 10 right there. Perfect. You see how that line is lined up with that number 10? We're good. And also, even if you're slightly this way or that way, it's not going to make a difference. We are on the flat parts of the camshaft. So if you're off just by a little bit, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just as long as you're at TDC or very close to TDC on the correct stroke. That's all we'll be using this feeler gauge for. Perfect. That's all adjusted. Alright, so all the valves are adjusted. Actually, before I put this away, I always like to do one final check to make sure all 16 of the rocker arm locking nuts are tight. Definitely don't want one of these to come loose while they're driving. That could potentially cause catastrophic engine damage or engine failure. All right, let's close it back up. So now we're prepared to prepare the valve cover for the new valve cover gasket, as well as the spark plug tube seals. What was I gonna get? Oh yeah, Q-tips. You want to remove all oil from the groove of the valve cover where the valve cover gasket sits, because you don't want the valve cover gasket to fall while you're installing it, causing a leak. And also, you don't want oil there. Oil is not meant to be there. So as you get a Q-tip, some brake cleaner. Get it nice and dry. Go one more round. That's about good right there. Okay, so now that the groove is clean, so these spark plug tube seals, I see everyone always try to put these in dry. You could really mess up the seals putting them in dry. And they use a hammer, and the metal inside the seal that gives it shape gets damaged and it'll leak. So what I do is put some assembly lube or oil in there. You got to make sure there's going to be a chamfer or 45-degree edge. You want to make sure that's well lubed, because that'll be what receives the spark plug tube seal. It's going to be slightly larger, and it'll be an interference fit. So you're going to need some lube. So this one also has a chamfer right here, the 45-degree on the edge. Oh, I got some oil there. We'll clean that. Make sure that's well lubed. And as a matter of fact, just lube the whole thing, because you want this area lubed too for when you put the valve cover on, so that it doesn't get torn on the valve cover or spark plug tube seals or spark plug tubes. So once those are lubricated real well, you can literally just press them in by hand. No need of a hammer or anything that can potentially damage your valve cover. Just like that. It's amazing what a little bit of lube can do. All right. Feel good. Okay. I get these until they're about flush with where this is flush right here with the valve cover. They can go in a little further, but I wouldn't recommend going in further, because sometimes this one won't have enough in contact with the spark plug tubes, and it can leak there. See, no hammer needed. These are lubed, and we also make sure that the spark plug tubes are also lubed. Put lube around here, not on the inside but on the outside, so that those seals can slip on real quick and not get cut. All right. Clean off that assembly lube that I spilled here. Okay. Valve cover gasket. It's going to be shaped just like that. See how this one has a real dramatic turn? That's going to be right here. And you also want to make sure that the positioning, there's going to be these nibs that protrude out. Those are what keeps holds these onto the valve cover. You want that on the valve cover side. On this cylinder head for the valve cover, there is absolutely no RTV needed. Do not use RTV. You only need to use RTV on a valve cover gasket if there's a connection point, let's say between the cam cap and the cylinder head, or if let's say the timing cover, let's say if there was a connection point over here for the timing cover like on the K series. But since this one, the cylinder head, the mating surface with the valve cover is completely flat, you don't need any RTV or silicone. All right. Let's go take this wrench off. We're not gonna leave this here. Do not forget to take this out. It's happened to me before. I left it on. And I accidentally started the engine. But luckily, the rotation of the engine puts it in this mode and not locked. So please make sure we remove the wrench from the crankshaft pulley bolt. All right, let's put her in. Let's put this harness up here, like, or down here like this. And then this one looks like it's gonna be a little hard to access with the cover on, so I'm gonna just go ahead and clip it back now while I can see it. Once the valve cover's on, you can't see it. This is the one I unclipped when I first started it. Okay. All right, let's go. So just make sure, microphone. So just make sure that the cover, the valve cover gasket doesn't fall off. So I usually hold on to it right here. Position the valve cover, and before I drop it, I'll put my hand here and feel and make sure the gasket didn't fall off. And it didn't, so we're good. I also want to make sure the wiring harness that we put back here isn't getting sandwiched in between. And it's not. So now these ones, you have to work it by hand. Don't force it. So that one is in. Work this one in, spark plug tube seals. Perfect. The valve cover is not going to sit flat until these spark plug tube seals are around those spark plug tubes. And you can damage those seals if you force it. Okay. So I'm in. Perfect. I like to use my fingernail to kind of push it in a little further so it doesn't pop right out. But that looks almost there. Okay. All right, that looks good. So what I usually do too is I get a dual flathead. Dual, you don't want to cut through the seal. And I'll actually push those spark plug tube seals a little farther down. Not that far, but just a little farther down. So they won't come back out. Okay, you see how this one's pretty close to the top? Just push it. You have to make sure you're using a dull flathead, not a razor blade or a sharp pick tool, a dull flathead. Perfect. That's in.
Put the valve cover sealing washers on. And these will center the valve cover to where it's supposed to be. Once again, I'm gonna stick my hand back here. Actually use a mirror to make sure no wiring harness is being pinched or sandwiched in between the valve cover and the cylinder head. Looking good. We're gonna work our way from the center out. So right now, I'm not going full torque. I'm just working my way down, letting it slowly sink evenly. Make sure this harness is free and it doesn't get stuck. Perfect. Now this is going to get torqued down to 8.7 foot-pounds, which, when you do the calculations, it's going to be 104 inch-pounds. Since I have an inch-pound torque wrench for my smaller torque specifications, so it's going to be 104. Or, what is it? Yeah, 8.7, 104. Working our way from the center out. Oh, that's 114. Oh no, that was right, 104. Awesome. Go ahead and reconnect our fuel injectors. Put the dipstick back on. Let me check his oil level while I'm at it. Oil level's good, almost max. And this cover. And then what I like to do, so I know that these hoses can be a pain to remove, especially when they've been there for a long time. I like to just put some assembly lube, just so it'll be easy to remove later down the road. Generally, my clients stick with me for a very long time. So if years down the road I'm gonna have to work on this again, whether it's a valve adjustment or any work that would require me to remove those hoses, I'm not gonna have a hard time. Okay. Put some lube on this one. This one's always a pain to remove. This is that technique where I slip it all the way through, and I'll move the hose clamps over, and then I'll slide it back. Oh, it's a little pain right now. This back over here. Wonderful. Let's go ahead and put the cam position sensor back on. Bolt. Always lubricate the O-ring. Definitely don't want that to tear and leak. And then this harness, let's go ahead and start moving it to its correct spot. This one doesn't have to be that tight. Alright, that's connected. I'll put this harness back, clip it back on in the back of the cylinder head. Then we'll put the bolt back on for that. Clip this back on. And we'll go ahead and this VTEC stuff plug back in. Awesome. This Set right there. All right, we're almost there, guys. So now we'll go ahead and replace the spark plugs. These get gapped to 1 millimeter. Spec calls for 1 to 1, from 1 millimeter to 1.1 millimeter. So I'm gonna go to the smaller value because over time that gap is only gonna get larger. So I'm gonna combine a 45 and a 55, 0.45 to 0.55 millimeters to make 1 millimeter. Perfect, right on the money. Right on the money. Perfect. Another big thing you want to make sure is not too close, so the gap is not too small or touching. I've come across this where during on a different brand spark plugs for like Ford or GM, during shipping, they're not as packaged as well as NGKs and Denzos, and then they'll move around and then they'll get smashed right here. All right, as easy as spark plugs sound, I do follow a strict procedure that I always made myself and my technicians or employees follow. And the first part of that procedure is to blow out the holes. If there is any dust, debris, bolt, whatever that got stuck in here, as soon as you remove that spark plug, it's gonna drop into the cylinder. So let's blow it off. So we know now that once we take the spark plugs out, nothing's gonna drop inside. I also do not ever use a power tool on the spark plugs. Don't ever use an impact to remove it. Even if it's broken loose, I still don't use power tools, because what's gonna happen is that ceramic can crack. Especially if you have the spark plug sockets like what I use. These snap-on ones are magnetic, so it's hard inside. I stopped using the rubber ones. There used to be rubber ones that hold the spark plug, but I've came across where the rubber would stick on the spark plug and not the socket, and now I have a piece of rubber stuck inside of a spark, or on the spark plug, inside of a spark plug tube seal. And just verify that they're the same ones. And I always do spark plugs one by one. So I blow it out, that cleans the threads. And I do not ever put anti-seize. Anti-seize, I feel like it's thick. From the factory, spark plugs, they don't put anti-seize on spark plugs. But a little bit of W40, just so it goes in smooth and so we can get an accurate torque spec is all you need. No anti-seize. I've never seized the spark plug doing it this way, and I've never seen a car from the factory that had anti-seize on the spark plugs. If the factory doesn't put anti-seize on the spark plugs, then you shouldn't. And the reason why I do one by one is if, let's say we removed all 4 of them, now we have so many opportunities for stuff to fall inside. Let's say I'm blowing the threads out of here, and it blows into the other one. Yeah, definitely don't want that. These get torqued down to 18 foot-pounds. So this one feels like it's a little hard to remove. So then what I do is I start tightening it back up, remove, and just work our way like that. So if it ever feels like it's getting hard, don't keep going. You have to break loose that carbon and that dirt, kind of like how you would with like a tap. And then it loosened up. Yeah, this one had a little bit of carbon, a little bit of rust. Had we kept going, we could have potentially damaged the threads. Final check. Perfect. Ignition coils. Just in case if you guys are new to this stuff, wondering why I numbered the ignition coils 1, 2, 3, 4 versus how you would normally read, is the numbering on an engine is based on the front of the engine. And what determines the front of the engine is where the crankshaft pulley is, right here. The transmission would generally be on the back of the engine. So it's just make sure that that one's in. Tip, in case you wondering why I numbered it the way I numbered it. Get torqued down to 104 inch-pounds or 8.7 foot-pounds. Go ahead and wipe my marks off. Leave them with a nice clean job. All right. And that is it, guys. Let's go ahead and start her up. Sounds very nice. Nice and smooth, no chatter. Thank you guys for watching.